Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, Adobe is finally making changes to mitigate zero-day Flash exploits with the help from Google. Chrysler recalls 1.4 million vehicles due to a software flaw, and then we'll go inside the Business Club, a cybercrime gang. Then it's a great big batch of your questions, a rockin' roundup, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi, everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 226 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly Systems Network and Administration podcast. We stream this episode live on August 6, 2015. This episode is brought to you by our three fine sponsors, DigitalOcean, Ting, and IXsystems. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this here show goes on. Our live stream, that's powered by the incredible Scale Engine over at scaleengine.com. You should really go check that out. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher. Yeah, it's Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Hey, Alan. Boy, can you believe it is August already? The year is just flying by. And
yes. And episode 226, it's like, that number is too damn high.
Yeah, it's too much. It's too much. I can't believe it. And it's like when you go to your favorite fishing spot just when they open up fishing season and they've just stocked the lake and there's like the fish are just like you can throw rocks in the lake and the fish will jump at it because they think it's feed. That's this week's episode of TechSNAP because DEF CON and Black Hat are coming up and there's so many fascinating things going on. Not only that, but then you have all the momentum of all of the regular traditional security issues that we have. So like the next couple of weeks of TechSNAP are just packed full of news, even though traditionally August is like a really slow time for the news cycle. But thanks to some of these conferences, some of these big exploits people have been working on for a long time are coming to light. And so we're going to have like a mix of some of that in the roundup, and then we have traditional issues that have just been going on for a while, which it's funny, Alan, our first story, it reminds me of, because we've been watching this stuff for a long time, and you and I have both been doing IT work for a decade now, and you look back at how we've had major just problem spots, soft spots, if you will, in security, in computing, and it's without a doubt now in the web generation, Flash is a soft spot that just keeps getting poked at, and it really is a plague that constantly provides us with issues. And so, is this where we start this week? Tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing that's where we start.
Basically. So in order to help prevent the recent rash of 0 days from hacking team and so on, Adobe and Google's Project Zero have teamed up to introduce 3 new mitigations built into Flash and the browsers that will prevent some of that from...
Good.
It should prevent some of these exploits from happening in the future.
So this could actually help walk back the amount of crap that we get now because of Flash.
Exactly. Basically, a large number of the recent exploits, even like going back a year or so, often are finding different ways to take advantage of this one particular problem. And they've solved that problem now so that Flash will just exit with an error when somebody tries to exploit it instead of actually letting it execute arbitrary code. And do
what a concept, Alan. What a concept.
Yeah. So the 3 new exploit mitigation techniques are being added by Adobe, or to Adobe's Flash player, to try to prevent the craziness we've been dealing with. So there's 3 new mitigations. The first is the buffer heap partitioning.
Okay.
So normally you have this area of memory and you put your different objects and variables in it or whatever. And a buffer overflow or a heap overflow is when basically, this variable is supposed to be this big and I write more to it and overwrite part of the next variable or whatever. So with partitioning, where you put some blank space in between the variables, and sometimes you can have what's called a guard page, and that will cause it to, basically, if you try to do something to that, the processor can freak out, or the operating system can. But also, with the partitioning, they're like, okay, some of these types of variables that are really sensitive, we're going to put them in a completely separate heap that's not even near the other one, so that you can't just, walk from one to the other. Now, that only gets really powerful if you have 64-bit Flash. Because with 32-bit, the whole memory space can only be 4 gigabytes, and so you can't put things very far apart. When you have a 64-bit address space, even if you only have 8 gigabytes of RAM, you can have an address space with like terabytes. So you can be like something here and then leave a terabyte of blank space and something over here. And then obviously it's very hard to figure out where that one little bit of flash memory is if it's randomly buried somewhere in this huge address space. And so
That makes sense.
that mitigation is now available in Chrome, but to get real advantage from it, you really want to use the 64-bit version of Chrome and the 64-bit version of Flash. And if you go over to I have the link at the bottom here to the Google Project Zero blog, they describe how you can make sure you're getting the 64-bit versions of everything.
And is there any disadvantage to running a 64-bit version of Chrome and Flash that you can think of?
Nope. I don't know why they haven't, it hasn't been more popular. I think at one point it was because Flash wasn't available as 64-bit.
Right, and they only had 64-bit Chrome for Windows for a little while. Is this only available? So hold on, now this might only be available for Windows.
No, it should be available for all operating systems.
Okay.
But it's only available in Chrome currently, but we expect it to be available in other browsers sometime in August.
When they finally catch up, right. When all the other browsers finally catch up.
Google just released this, so Firefox just has to, get it into the next release, right?
Catch up.
With the release process, it basically has to go through, the Aurora build and the nightly build and down to beta, and then eventually it shows up in a release.
I mean, not to mention they have all those other Chrome features they're still trying to catch up to, so. I'm just kidding. I'm just trying to rally you up.
It's always saying they're trying to catch up.
I was just seeing if I could get
version numbers.
Yeah, exactly. So
I want my Firefox 4 back.
So the reality is, if this works,
that'll make it harder to do these exploits.
I mean, that's something, right?
Yeah. And then we have another one, the stronger randomization of the Flash heap. So currently, the Flash heap kind of always ends up in this kind of predictable spot.
Okay.
With this change, they make it much harder to guess where it is going to be. And they also make it so that when you do a large allocation of memory, that one gets randomized as well, causing it to be at an unpredictable location. So this, the Google Project Zero guys talk about, here's an exploit we had like last year or earlier this year. And the way it worked was we just kept making this object bigger until it was like a gigabyte. And eventually we would be able to guess where it was, or at least where part of it was, so that we could find the code we wanted to execute. Well, now with a big 64-bit address space and randomized locations, good luck trying to find that chunk of memory you're allocating.
No kidding.
In that giant address space.
No kidding.
Even if you allocate all the RAM on the computer, the address space is still so much bigger. It's like a needle in a haystack.
Ours calls it no man's land in this article. That's pretty.
Well, no, the no man's land is the guard page you put in between.
That's
the previous
one. Okay.
Now so the way most of these exploits work is that you'll have some variable, something that the user can write to, and then after that there's a vector variable. And the way they store those variables is it has the length at the very beginning and then the data. So then you can, it's like, the next X bytes are this variable, and after that, look for the next variable. The way the exploits work is by looking at the thing before that variable, they could make that a little bit too long and overwrite the length and make it longer, allowing them to do whatever they needed to do, to replace that pointer or whatever with the pointer to the exploit. So what Adobe did was they basically added a length validation secret, right? So many of the recent exploits and previous exploits worked by overwriting the length of the variable or the vector objects, and then overflowing the memory. So with, even with the two previous mitigations, we'll make it a lot harder to do that. Adobe still added this mitigation that will detect when that's happening and allow Flash to just exit with an error instead. So basically, at the end of the length, they're going to basically have a hash of the length and a secret. I don't know if it'll be random or exactly where the secret comes from. But it's something the attacker won't know. So now when the attacker writes a new length, they don't have the secret to calculate a hash of that length plus the secret in order to update the secret. And so when the secret doesn't match the length, Adobe says, that's invalid. Somebody's been screwing with our memory, and exits with an error instead.
It short circuits. It dies. It dies instead of proceeding.
Exactly. It exits with a runtime error, so the user can possibly even know that something weird is happening. And it says this mitigation is available in all Flash builds on all operating systems starting with 18.00209. So that one's already available on every browser.
Nice.
So that one should help a lot of these exploits from going forward, and we should have to patch Flash a lot less frequently now.
Well, now, what are we going to talk about on TechSNAP all the time?
Well, I'm sure the hackers will still find other ways. They just we just closed one of the bigger doors.
Yeah, I think you might be right.
This is, had these exploit mitigations been widely available earlier, they likely would have blunted the effects of at least the 3 most recent zero-day vulnerabilities.
Now, Alan, Dave in the chat room, I don't know if you have enough information to answer, but he asks, could this also mean that a simple error could potentially just crash Flash Player now?
No, like this is something that's the secret and the length of the variable and so on is actually is done by the Flash code itself.
Okay.
So it's not something that, like, when you're writing action script, you don't even know that this is happening.
Right. Okay.
So a programming error introduced by, somebody who's writing a Flash program can't just crash the Flash player. You would have to be illegally modifying memory in order to crash it. And in that case, that's what you want to happen. I almost wonder if you could implement this in operating systems.
Yeah, I was just kind of like, well, I'm wondering why they only apply it here.
Obviously, it would take more memory to do this, right? For every application, you have to keep this Sentinel and so on.
At least virtual memory.
Yeah.
All right, Alan. Well, that could be potentially huge news.
Yep.
That I didn't quite understand, so I'm glad you broke it all down for us. Any other thoughts on that story?
No, that's about it for that one.
All right, Mr. Jude. Well, then I want to take a moment. I want to tell you about something you've never heard of before. I'm going to blow your mind, Alan. Are you ready for this?
Sure.
Brace yourself. There is a hardware provider out there that gives you accurate quotes that will work with you to make sure it's the perfect hardware. They're going to give you a white glove experience. They're going to build these machines, and then they're going to test them before they send them to you. And they also support free BSD and open source in general, including Linux and other ones. Can you believe this, Alan? Such a thing exists. It's IXsystems. Alan, go to IXsystems.com/TechSNAP. And Alan, I want you to learn about them for the first time ever because you've never heard about them before until I just told you. IXsystems.com/TechSNAP. And that's why Scale Engine runs off IXsystems, right, Alan?
Yep.
Because you never heard of them before until now, right, Alan? Because yeah, right. And actually, I want you to go to
my face isn't on their website or anything.
No, not at all. In fact, if you were over at IXsystems' Facebook page, you might have noticed they recently had some new photos posted with the new logo going up on the front of the building. Look at that thing.
Got the new sign.
That is sharp looking. I really, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give that a like right now. Boom, just like that S. Look at that. The new logo is really clean. I want you to go to IXsystems.com/TechSNAP. They have a white paper over there you can grab. And also go over to their website and just check them out. Tons of good rigs. Stuff that you could run your entire enterprise off, your virtualized infrastructure, your website, all of that, down to just something for your small business, like a FreeNAS system. We've gotten some really great emails about people who have implemented FreeNAS for their small business, doctors' offices. I've got actually a note from somebody who works at a doctor's office and has a FreeNAS machine, and they've set it up. They can even they use Plex, and for the patients who are undergoing I don't actually know what, but it's like they're getting a treatment. They're getting they have to sit there with an IV, and they're getting a treatment, and they have LCD screens, and they're using Plex streaming from their FreeNAS machine to the LCD screens on these beds that are built in. They have like an arm with these LCD screens, and the patients get to pick their media, all streaming from a FreeNAS rig. They have 6 beds doing it, and it just runs like a rock. So from like a system like IXsystems has it's literally like you could hold it. It's unbelievable the size and the power you get, all the way up to these huge enterprise class rigs that are just unbelievably powerful, or custom built solutions like Mr. Jude takes advantage of. Have you gotten your new rigs yet?
Not yet. Very soon. But yeah, 216 terabytes.
You need like an evil mustache you can stroke when you say that, and like put your pinky up in the air, like. That'd be good. Yeah, it's amazing too, because when you implement something based on open source, it's so nice to have a hardware vendor who's not going to punt when you have an issue. They really understand what's going on, and not only that, but the rig that's been built is really best in class. So the hardware is great, the support's great, and they're not going to punt when you ever have an issue. IXsystems.com/TechSNAP. Go check them out. They're a secret weapon. If I had known about them a dozen years ago, I might still be an IT contractor.
Yeah, because your life would just be so much easier.
Really. I mean, it's in a way, like, I kind of wish I would have known about them a lot sooner. But it's not too late for the audience. IXsystems.com/TechSNAP, and a big thank you to IXsystems for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. Okay, Alan, so there's a lot going on these days because, Black Hat and other, what's the other one? DEF CON are going on, DEF CON. And so along this, a lot of guys are coming out with, and groups are coming out with their big stories about what they've been able to do. And there's actually been some real world results from some of this stuff. And I guess maybe we start now with Fiat Chrysler. They've had a rather major recall as a result of some of this stuff.
They had to recall 1.4 million vehicles because the onboard Uconnect system allowed cars and trucks equipped with these radios to be vulnerable to hacking remotely. For example, some of the Jeep vehicles, you could actually turn the ignition off while it was driving down the highway at speed.
Over what, a cellular connection, I guess?
I think they have a Bluetooth connection. Basically, they didn't want to run wires between the different parts of the computer in the cabin and the other part that's in the trunk or whatever.
Yeah.
So they did it with Bluetooth.
You're kidding me.
Nope. With no security. So basically, if you could just drive up beside the thing, go bloop, and turn it off.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now what? So they're doing a recall. They're doing a recall.
The recall includes Dodge Ram pickups, Jeep Cherokee and Grand Cherokee SUVs, the Dodge Challenger sports car, and the Viper supercar.
Okay. So quite a bit.
So it's kind of an odd mix of pickup trucks, SUVs, and sports cars.
Yeah. I guess it depends on what entertainment system they have, like that Uconnect system, whatever they call it.
Yeah. So this isn't the first time that automobiles have been vulnerable to hacking, but this one's kind of a step further. But yeah, so apparently the Fiat Chrysler Uconnect infotainment system uses Sprint's wireless network as well, but it's not a Sprint issue.
Yeah, so there you go. So if it's on internet, it's got a public IP address, most likely.
It seems like it, yeah. So unauthorized remote access to certain vehicle systems was blocked with a network level improvement on Thursday, the company said in a statement. So yeah, apparently they're all linked on a Sprint network as well, and they put in some firewall rules to stop vehicles from talking to each other or something. They say affected customers will receive a USB device which they'll plug into their car and it will remotely upgrade the firmware.
Oh, that'll go fine. There will be no problem with that.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, so first of all, let's just begin with the practical issues there. They got to have the right mailing address for the customer on file. If it's been a few years,
what if I've
good
moved
luck.
since I bought a car?
Right, exactly.
What if I didn't register?
Where's the USB port? You got to describe to the customer where the USB port is. That's probably different for every single make. Right, every single model is going to be different. So some of them is going to be in the trunk. Some of them.
Well, no, I imagine it. There's almost every car has one by the radio.
Maybe
center
some
console,
of them.
Just because.
You know what? My wife's car, it's in the trunk. So when you have to update the maps, you have to go to the trunk. I mean, for hers, it's just that's where it's at.
Doesn't it have one in the dash to plug your phone in?
Nope.
Well, that's not very useful.
I agree. It's a little silly.
I'm just as worried about my Ford because it has a Microsoft sync system.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just a disaster, Alan. It's just a disaster.
Yeah. So two Democratic senators in the U.S. have introduced legislation that would direct the National Highway Transportation Safety Authority and the Federal Trade Commission to establish rules to secure cars and protect customer privacy. I'm not exactly sure how you can legislate to write secure software, though.
Yeah, this is concerning.
But apparently the senator's bill would establish a rating system to inform owners about how secure their vehicles are beyond the minimum federal requirements. So if it's a star system like the crash test rating, I suppose that makes sense, but how do you determine who gets how many stars?
Yeah, and is that going to be, that's, of course, you'll just probably
would it be a track record after the fact? And if you're auditing it before the fact, wouldn't anything that's not the best be bad?
Two things jump out at me. Number one is, it's probably going to be an expansion of the existing safety system now, right? And that means more, of course, bureaucracy. But number two is it seems like you'd have to have years of track record to really have that data be useful. And at the beginning, it's going to be either conjecture based on reports or based on hypothetical testing and not based on
an audit or something. It's like, well, they're not going to read all the code, so it's going to be like PCI DSS, and that'll just be a waste of money.
I don't feel like with all of these exploits we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks with the Jeeps and this stuff, we don't actually have a solid sense of the practical risk involved. How do you figure out what my device, what my car is? How do you narrow all that down? How do you actually get to my car? And what are my options?
Buy the new Toyota Corolla because it has a 5 USBs rating.
Right, yeah. And what are my options, like, once you've compromised my system? Could I just put it in neutral, turn my car on and off again, and get control again? Like all these things need to be factored into a rating system, and it's going to take a decade to have all of that kind of data to be able to have anything of any use.
Also,
they have to start at some point, though, I suppose.
It also seems like, how did they not think of to have a firewall in the car?
Yeah.
Only allow outbound connections, not inbound.
Yeah, well, that's about saving money, I guess.
Firewall. It's not hard to do. You can get them. They're a thing called free software.
I guess that's about money? I can't. I
don't know. Getting sued because someone died because I turned off their car remotely and they lost control because the brakes don't work.
Yeah.
Is kind of worse.
Yeah, I totally agree. I do totally agree with you there. I totally agree. It makes you think, though.
Yep.
How could they legislate this? I can't fathom it, to be honest with you. But
yeah.
Any other thoughts on that story, Mr. Jude?
Nope, that's about it.
All right, well, then I'll tell you about my good friends over at Ting. Go to techsnap.ting.com. My cell provider now for over 2 years. We have a lot of folks now in the JB crew using Ting. Rikai, our editor, uses it. Noah is a Ting customer. I believe producer Q5Sys is a Ting customer. Angela is a Ting customer. I have our nanny on Ting. And I'm missing people too. I think a couple of our other producers are on Ting. Like the whole crew is on Ting, and a few of those are all under one account, and that's really nice because it's only $6 a month for the line, and then just the usage on top of that. Well, everybody I just named is pretty savvy, and they're all really comfortable with like Wi-Fi calling, Hangouts, Telegram, and stuff like that. So we just get an outrageous savings on our bill. It's usually no more than like $40, $50 a month at max, and that's like when it's $50 a month. It's like when we're all traveling and going to an event.
Yeah. With every cell phone provider available in Canada, the $50 is the minimum to have an account.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, techsnap.ting.com. Go there because not only does that support this show and it keeps us going, but it gets you a $25 discount off your first device if you have a Ting-compatible device. And they got like a whole bunch because they got GSM and CDMA networks. Well, then they'll give you a $25 discount off of your service for a month, and or just your credit towards the credit, and for me that paid for more than my first month. They also have an early termination relief program, which is pretty sweet if you're in one of those duopoly contracts. And then, like, one of the nice things about Ting, besides the fact there's no contract, it's only pay for what you use. It's $6 a month for the line. The phones are unlocked. No hold customer service. Isn't that nice? No hold customer service. Yeah, you call them between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. East Coast time. And they also have a great dashboard. And one of the other things I think that's outrageously great about Ting is there's so many great ways to stay connected with Ting. They have Twitter. They have an active YouTube profile. They also have a really great blog. In fact, this week, if you've been a Ting customer, I encourage you to go to ting.com/blog. Go to techsnap.ting.com, then click on the blog link. They have a security update. There was as a precautionary message, they say, they're in the process of resetting everyone's Ting account password. Which, yeah, I know.
Yeah, this was a bigger thing that actually happened at Tucows, the parent company, and in fact, Hover and OpenSRS and everything as well.
And we're going to talk more about it in the roundup. And we'll give you more information there. But this is just something we want to get the word out. Really,
get your password reset.
Yeah, Ting says here some hoodwinks tried to get into Ting. We have no evidence that any accounts were accessed or any sensitive details were lifted. But they want you to go out there and try to reset and change your password because just to be safe, they say they've been looking and they're continuing to look. They have no cause for worry at the moment, but they're resetting every Ting's customer password. It's just an exercising of overabundance of caution, which we here on the TechSNAP program absolutely appreciate.
They didn't say, well, we saw something suspicious, but we didn't see any evidence of any files being taken, so we're not going to make you do anything. It's like, no, we're going to reset because it's better to reset. Might
as well do it anyways. It's good hygiene. Also, I encourage you to think of Ting outside the box. Remember, because you only pay for what you use. You can go get that Ting SIM card for $9. No contract.
Stick that in any phone you already have.
Yeah, stick in a phone you've got or a device. Like if you've got a Raspberry Pi that has the connector for the GSM chip, that's pretty cool. The Kyocera Dura X2 is back, $47. This thing is a rugged SOB feature phone. And then, of course, they've got the Nexus 6, the Moto G, the Moto E. Of course, they've also got the Samsung line of devices. They got the iPhone 4, 5, and 6. They got the OnePlus. So many awesome devices. Moto X2 is a great device. And then they got the Cadillac, the real nice device, the luxury boat, the showboat of Android devices, the Samsung Galaxy Edge. What a crazy phone. They've also got the S6 regular, and of course they've got the Tab. Go and of course the Nexus 6 as well, and the HTC One M8. Lots of really nice. You have the Nexus 6, Alan. How are you liking that?
I am loving it.
Wow, that's a monster. That is a monster.
It works great though.
Yeah.
And it's snappy and it gets updates on a good schedule.
Yeah. That is very true. In fact, we're going to talk more about that in the roundup, as a matter of fact. You are in a good spot. And you know what? When you combine that with the Ting service with no contract, pay for what you use, $6 for the line, TechSNAP.ting.com. Man, that's a cool combo. TechSNAP.ting.com. And a big thanks to Ting. I mean, seriously, go over there and just try out like the savings calculator for a bit and just see how much you would save. You might be like me. It might be like $2,000. And I look at that and I go, geez, I can buy a laptop every couple of years with that. That's super nice. TechSNAP.ting.com. Big thanks to Ting for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. All right, so Brian Krebs takes us on into our next story. Goes into a deep dive, Alan. I feel like it's a mystery story inside the $100 billion business club crime gang. Tell me all about this one.
Yes, so Krebs is doing a profile on this group that dubbed themselves Business Club, and who apparently has managed to steal more than $100 million from various European banks and businesses.
The Business Club. I love it.
So the story centers around the Game Over Zeus Trojan and botnet. So we talked about Zeus before. It's this banking malware that can like intercept the multi-factor authentication stuff. So basically, when you log into your bank, it's modifying the page to make the look like your bank is asking you for like your secret questions and stuff, even when they're not. So that when the bad guys are using your account and they get asked a secret question, they already know the answer.
Very clever.
And stuff like that. Or even, doing it with multi-factor authentication stuff. So like as soon as you log in, they're like, oh, we're ready. And they're sitting there. And then, when you try to do something normal, maybe they pop up, hey, we need you to enter the code. And then you get a code comes up on your phone and you're like, oh, okay. And you type it in. But really, it was the code was being sent by their request to transfer all your money to Russia or whatever. So this is this. So there is a commercial version that's been available, and any cyber criminal could buy it for a couple $100 on one of these underground forums.
Lovely.
But this is the special version that the author kept for himself, and he used it as part of this business club gang.
Part of his private collection, Alan.
Yeah. So he had a even better version of Zeus that he only used himself as part of this group.
Okay.
So last year there was a takedown of the Game Over Zeus botnet, and at one point the FBI had a bounty of $3 million in order to catch the author, Evgeny, some Russian name I can't possibly pronounce, who went by the hacker nickname Slavic. But most of the details behind this were kind of unknown. Nobody really knew. But that changed today with the release of a detailed report from Foxit, which is a security firm based in the Netherlands that does research on this kind of stuff. Okay. Apparently, they managed to secretly gain access to a server that was used by the group's members. That server, which they rented from a place, was used to launch cyber attacks and also had chat logs between the crime group's leaders. And it kind of gave them some background on what was actually happening inside the group. So the chat logs show that the crime group referred to itself as Business Club and counted among its members a core group of about half a dozen people that then were supported by a network of more than 50 different people. They say, in true Ocean's 11 fashion, each Business Club member brought some kind of cybercrime specialty with them to the group.
Nice.
So they had one guy that was an expert at this and one guy that was an expert at that, kind of like in Ocean's 11, including 24/7 tech support technicians, third-party suppliers of ancillary miscellaneous software and stuff like that, or a guy that was an expert at getting money mules or tricking people into doing stuff like that, or people like we trained to launder stolen funds and all that kind of stuff. So the Business Club members who had access to the Game Over Zeus botnet panel for hijacking online banking transactions could use the panel to intercept security challenges thrown up by the victim's bank, including one-time tokens and secret questions and that kind of stuff, and then be able to get the victim to actually respond to the challenge to let them to go through. Apparently, the gang dubbed this botnet interface the World Bank Center, with the tagline beneath it that read, "We are playing with your banks."
Oh, cute. How cute.
Yeah. The Business Club regularly divvied up its profits from its cyber heist, although Fox IT said it lamentably doesn't have the details on how that actually worked. However, Slavic, the architect of the Zeus and Game Over Zeus botnets, didn't share his entire cybercrime machine with the club members. According to Foxit, the malware author converted part of the botnet that was previously being used for cyber heists to steal money into a distributed espionage system that targeted specific information from computers in neighboring countries, including Georgia, Turkey, and the Ukraine. So beginning in late 2013, about the time that the conflict between Ukraine and Russia was starting to heat up, Slavic retooled most of the cyber heist botnet to serve in a purely spying role and began scouring infected systems in the Ukraine for specific keywords in emails and documents that it found, looking for classified documents and certain keywords having to do with the Ukrainian intelligence agency and things like that.
What do you suppose that implies?
I think at some point, especially when the heat got turned on and they had this $3 million bounty, that he got an offer from a government and a country that he's in to protect him in exchange for his services.
So he starts spying on the new Ukrainian government.
Yeah, so use your botnet to spy on the Ukrainian government for us, and we won't let the Americans come arrest you for stealing the money that you had stole or whatever, right?
Boy, there is some the history. Hopefully, will connect the dots on that story. That's interesting.
Yeah. Apparently the botnet was also then later used against Turkey. It says the keywords are around arms shipments and Russian mercenaries in Syria. Obviously, this is something that Turkey would be interested in, and in this case, it was obvious that the Russians wanted to know how much the Turkish already knew. So it's like Russia sends mercenaries into Syria and then is watching the computers of the neighboring countries to see if they know that it's Russia that's doing it yet.
Well, and it's interesting because the current kind of line of thinking is that, not to bring politics into TechSNAP, but the situation in Benghazi was actually about, there was a CIA annex station next to Benghazi that was coordinating transfers of weapons from Turkey to Libyan rebels and Syrian rebels, and Turkey was coordinating the transfer of those weapons from the U.S. as sort of a third-party intermediary to sort of absolve the U.S. of the connection to the weapons. And so it's fascinating to see that this would be communications from the Turkish government that are classified because...
that are being surveilled by this Zeus banking Trojan.
Right. And if there is connections to the Russian government, because they would likely be the ones interested in monitoring the new Ukrainian government, they'd also be interested in the U.S. supplying arms to Syrian rebels. Exactly.
They were backing the Syrian government and so on.
Yeah. He's backing Assad.
So specifically, it says the espionage side of things was purely managed by Slavic himself. The rest of his business club coworkers might not have been happy about that because all of a sudden the botnet's not being used to make money but to help the Russian government, and I'm guessing most of them cared less about the Russian government than the money.
Right.
They would probably have been happy to work together on fraud, but if they see that the system they were working on is also being used for espionage against their own country, they might feel compelled to use that against him. And at one point there was a suggestion would the business club guys turn Slavic in just to get the $3 million reward?
Right. Yeah, maybe, huh?
But if you're interested in more of this, check out the full white paper from Foxit.
There you go. We've been showing a little bit of it in the video version.
The Krebs article has quite a good bit of information in it as well.
Yeah.
Wow. And if you just like these kind of profiles, you should also check out Krebs' book where he does the same thing for a spamming group.
Yeah, Spam Nation.
Yeah, because he's that's what he was focused on before he got as much into the security aspect.
Yep. Interesting, isn't it, to see how things that involve like the cybersecurity world are perhaps connected to very real world politics, and wouldn't it make sense that an extremely high profile, well known botnet author would be contacted by a government agency and be like, "Hey, we want to use you, and we're willing to give you something in exchange." It's the stuff that sounds like movies are made of, actually. Like Mission Impossible movies and things like that.
Well, it's like this one is like they compared it to Ocean's 11 because, they had a different expert for each cyber specialty. Yeah.
Wow. And it's actually happening in the real world, which blows my mind. And we're talking about it in TechSNAP.
I just about threw up in my mouth, but there's going to be a Cyber 11, isn't there?
Oh, a Cyber.
Somebody's going to do it.
They're going to call it Cyber 11.
Yeah.
You just coined it right here. Episode 226.
I threw up in my mouth when I did it, too.
Oh, man. Wow. It's going to be called Cyber 11, too. Okay,
Or would it be 14 because they've already done Oceans 11, 12, and 13?
Maybe.
Cyber 14.
Either way, you should get a little check. I think you should get you should get a little money for that because we can point to this. We can time embed in the YouTube link and be like, no, Alan Jude has a trademark on that. Trademark by Alan Jude. Boom, problem solved. All right, Alan, let me tell you about something else that's going to solve your problems. That's DigitalOcean, simple cloud hosting dedicated to offering the most intuitive and easy way for you to spin up a cloud server. I love DigitalOcean. It's my Linux infrastructure on demand, buddy. And here's why I say that. You can get started in less than 55 seconds. Some people, they get started even, like, I got like a tweet, it was like 32 seconds, something like that. Blows my freaking brain apart. And pricing plans start at only $5 a month. That'll get you 512 megabytes of RAM, a 20 gigabyte SSD. Yeah, buddy, I said a 20 gigabyte SSD, one CPU, and a terabyte of transfer. At DigitalOcean, they have data centers in New York, San Francisco, Singapore, Amsterdam, London, and in Germany. And that one in Germany is sweet. 40 gigabit E connections to each hypervisor. What I really like about DigitalOcean, though, is the interface. I feel like the rest of the industry can just like sit up and take notice. They really have something great here. You can get your system set up. It's clear which system you're going to use and how much it's going to cost you, what region's going to be deployed, and what operating system. They got Ubuntu, Fedora, Debian, CentOS, CoreOS. Of course, they've even got free BSD now. Fedora 22 is available, and they got the Ubuntu LTSs. They also have one-click deployments of applications like Ruby on Rails and Docker and all that good stuff. They use Doku on the back end, and some of the work they've done there is open sourced up on GitHub as well. And if you use our promo code, and we got a great one, SNAPOcean, well, then you get a $10 credit. SNAPOcean gives you a $10 credit. Now think about that. $5 rig, you can get going for 2 months. 2 months, you can try out OwnCloud, GitLab, WordPress, Ghost, which is really great. I also would recommend SyncThing. It's had a ton of changes and a ton of improvements, and I've just started looking at it again. And Dropbox is dead. SyncThing is looking really good. As long as if you control all the machines you want to sync to, it's a no-brainer. And you can use DigitalOcean to recreate that offsite cloud-like experience, which is so slick if you're moving between your home and a workspace or something like that to have that intermediary. And because they have super fast connections on the DigitalOcean droplets, it pulls down not so fast. It's basically as fast as you can take it, and so the thing syncs so dang fast. And you know what? You can try it out. Just try it out. 2 months for free when you use the promo code SNAPOcean. That gives you a $10 credit. Try that $5 rig and just play with stuff and see what I'm talking about. Experience their interface, experience deploying applications, all of that. Spin up a droplet. And not only that, in that time you could try out some of their great tutorials. Like they have one up there on their website right now, how to install Linux, Nginx, MySQL, PHP on Debian 7, the limp stack. Because Nginx is really, it's a lot of people are looking at this over Apache these days for tons of good reasons. And some good documentation on how to actually do it is invaluable.
If you're only running like one application or something, you're definitely better. Basically, if you can get away without having to have .htaccess files because you can put it in the config file, there's no reason to use Apache anymore, except for the case where you're hosting websites for a whole bunch of people and they need to be able to adjust the chunks of the config. And there's even ways to do it with Nginx. They're not as nice. But
But I mean, this is what I love about it is like DigitalOcean, like it's so, I mean, $5 a month is nuts, but then they have these tutorials. They're edited by professionals. They pay people for their contributions, so they're really good. And you can try all of it out for 2 months for free when you use our promo code SNAPOcean. Just go over to DigitalOcean.com and use the promo code SNAPOcean. And a huge thanks to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. Hey, Mr. Jude, before we move on, do you want to give a plugs for this week's episode of the old BSD Now program?
Yes, you should check it out. And actually, what we were just talking about made me think of one of the news items we covered was somebody on GitHub has done up a huge write-up on how to do a ZFS remote backup.
Oh, nice.
Now, their setup is to like a Raspberry Pi at their parents' house.
Oh, cool.
But you could also do it to a DigitalOcean droplet because they run FreeBSD. Or you can even do it with ZFS on Linux on a DigitalOcean droplet.
Yep. Episode 101.
And, so that's in there. And because it's on GitHub, it's easy for people to submit change pull requests on it and stuff to like improve it or add extra examples or whatever. So you should definitely check out that article if you're interested in remotely backing up.
Gosh, that's really cool.
And basically, it has a bunch of, it goes through the pros and cons of doing it that way versus, doing SyncThing or rsync or Dropbox or whatever.
You guys also had the interview with Adrian in this interview of BSD.
Interview with Adrian Chad. That was a 45-minute interview. It was amazing. He's a great guy.
Ways to improve FreeBSD, huh?
Yeah, so there was a Reddit thread he started about that, asking, and it got hundreds and hundreds of responses. And we talked to him about a bunch of those and
Great
walking
idea.
through some of the stuff.
That's a great idea.
All kinds of great stuff.
Cool. Episode 101 of the BSD Now program. This is the midway point in the TechSNAP program, so if you want more Jude in your face when we wrap up, you go get the HD version right now, and then it should be done about the time we're finished up, and then you just start it up full screen, Alan's all up in your grill, and you're good to go. Episode 101 of the BSD Now program. And stay tuned, there could be some interesting surprises very soon. But with the news all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to TechSNAP@JupiterBroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of the Jupiter Broadcasting website, or even better, like a ninja, creating a thread over on our subreddit at TechSNAP.reddit.com. Our first email this week comes from Tim, and Tim writes in about a FreeNAS question and quad gigabit Ethernet. Damn, son. He says, hey, Alan and Chris. Thanks again for always putting together a great show. It's always well worth the listen. I'm in the midst of building a new home NAS. I love the stage he's in right now. He says, I'm planning to use FreeNAS. He's in the planning, which is so much fun. And I'm tossing around a few networking ideas with connections with the project. The motherboard I've purchased has an Intel C2000 system on a chip, i3-54 NIC, with 4 gigabit Ethernet ports. My LAN has been cruising with only 100 megabit connections, even though one or two of my other devices has a gigabit interface. I'm writing to ask what sort of options I might have to put these 4 gigabit E ports to use in my home network. I'm obviously not at the point where I would benefit from setting up a lag interface, which would gain me any performance, but I'd like to start with taking advantage of gigabit speeds as much as I can, especially for daily backups. Mm-hmm. It is possible and wise to bridge the ports and a subset of ports together in a switch-like fashion so that traffic could pass across them like a switch. He's asking you that question. Mm-hmm. What considerations and concerns would this raise for reliability and security? Would I just be better off buying a gigabit switch and only using one of my FreeNAS Ethernet ports for now? Thanks as always for the great show, Tim.
Yeah, so there's a couple options there. So if you don't have the gigabit switch, then if you were to connect each computer individually to one of those gigabit ports and bridge them, it would kind of act like a switch.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be as fast as a switch because the network cards actually have to do a lot more work than a switch does, because the switching would actually happen in the operating system, so it's not as fast as when it's happening in hardware. But in general, that'll work, and that'll let you have gigabit speeds on a couple more computers without buying a gigabit switch. At the same time, a little like 5-port gigabit switch is like $40.
Nothing, right? I mean, it's totally worth
even
it.
Less, yeah.
And it's just so nice.
You know, I just bought yet another of the Netgear GS724T.
Yeah. Yep.
24-port gigabit switch for $199.
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah, and that one has support for lags and VLANs and all the stuff you might need. Other options you have are, for example, the file server here at my house has 4 gigabit ports. I have 2 of them each on lags, which are link aggregation groups. You make 2 network cards work together, bond together as if they were one. 2 of the ports go to my home network, and 2 of the ports go to my office network. And that's 2 completely different subnets, and computers upstairs in my house can't talk to the computers in my office. But we both share the file server. And stuff like that. And then the chat room was asking about a lag. So when you bond 2 network cards together, the way it works is the driver will do a hash of the from and to addresses on the packets. Okay. And decide, and basically, depending on, if the hash is even or odd, it will send the packet out port 1 or port 2. And so that means that you can now send 2 gigabits of traffic out to the network. But if you're sending just from your file server to one machine, it's always going to hash to one of the ports or the other, and so you're actually not going to gain any speed.
Okay.
So it doesn't make one connection faster.
Okay.
But if you have multiple connections, it can make it faster.
Okay.
Although there is a 50% chance that both will get hashed to the same NIC and screw you up. It depends on some settings whether the hash includes more than just the MAC address. I think usually it's the MAC address and the IP address, but optionally some like FreeBSD's driver supports also doing layer 4, which will be the TCP/IP port number, which would allow you, if you were making 2 connections between the file server and your computer, to actually use both gigabits.
Right.
The problem is the switch if it only does layer 2 and 3, right, the MAC address and the IP address, it's going to receive the data from both NICs at 2 gigabits and then try to send it all down one port to the other computer, and it's not going to work. So I did some ingenious things with VLANs to get around that. So the FreeBSD lag driver actually has an option called round robin, where it just fires every other packet out of the 2 ports. So it's just using all the NICs all the time. When those arrive at the switch, the second port is in a different VLAN than the first port.
Okay.
So the packets don't get recombined. They stay separate. And then when they get over to the destination ports, eventually they get untagged as they leave the switch. And so when they arrive at the destination system, it just comes in as both streams at the same time.
Okay.
Although technically this violates the Ethernet standard because the frames aren't necessarily in order, because you're just round robining them out as fast as you can.
You're making a mess. Yeah, it's a mess.
Yeah, but the FreeBSD driver will handle it, and it'll work.
Okay.
Your other option is obviously if you do the proper protocol, LACP or Link Aggregation Control Protocol, it means the switches will negotiate the setup and will be able to deal with if one of the NICs goes down or if you add a third NIC at any time and all this kind of craziness.
Sure. All right, Mr. Jude, are you ready for the next question?
So I guess he asked about security. Basically, depending how you set it up, you can actually make it so that if you don't bridge them, you could make it so that, computers over here can access this share, but not, and only computers over here, this one, but they can't talk to each other. Whereas if you bridge them, the traffic, basically your file server turns into a switch, and it's not as good. In general, I'd say you could buy the gigabit switch, but if you don't want to, you can play with that and bridge it and have it. The problem with that is if you reboot your FreeNAS, you're going to temporarily disable the internet, the network connection between your machines that used to use a switch instead.
All right, Mr. Jude.
Okay, moving on.
Moving on. Next question comes in from Hacker Shack. How about that one? Hacker Shack. No, you don't think that? I think that's a good one. I like that. Anyways, he says, can anyone recommend a good eSATA enclosure for a 3.5-inch SATA drive? I have an old Ultima aluminum case that is perfect, but it isn't sold anywhere. I'd like to buy one and like to place a 4 terabyte drive in the enclosure. Now, Alan, I wanted to kind of actually maybe even talk a little more about eSATA enclosures, hooking them up to a storage array and using them with ZFS, and your thoughts on that in general, because I have to be honest with you, as somebody who has a FreeNAS Mini with a set amount of disks, it's extremely, extremely, extremely tempting to use that eSATA port to hook up a big old something multiplex with a whole bunch of more disks or something, because I need more storage.
Yeah, so eSATA is definitely better than USB,
right?
Because in the end, it's just SATA. The problem is once you start using something that's multiplexing or something like that, then that's a translation step, and the big thing there is it can mean that if that gets stuck on an error or something, it means all those drives disappear at once.
Okay.
Which can be unhelpful.
You know what? Yes, in my experience,
usually, power cycle it and it all comes back and ZFS will recover. It's not so bad, but not my preference, but definitely doable.
Okay, so when I asked you about USB, you were kind of like,
yeah, USB
thumbs
is
down.
No.
Okay, all right. So eSATA a little more comfortable with. All right, very good. All right, next email.
But for my setup, slightly different, I suppose. But I got an LSI controller card that has external SAS connector, and then connected to an external chassis that just had the more disks in it. That's probably a lot more expensive than a eSATA enclosure off your Newegg or NCIX or whatever. But it depends what you're doing. In my case, I wanted the second shelf of disks to be rack mountable.
All right,
obviously
Alan.
Not what most people are doing.
Next email comes in from Paul, and Paul writes, he says, hi, Chris and Alan. First of all, thanks for the great show. I've been listening to LAS and TechSNAP regularly for a couple of years now. He says you regularly recommend the use of pfSense. I installed it on suitable hardware. It makes for a very capable router. Compared with consumer routers, it's highly configurable and it's at least updated. Security risks due to consumer routers are not getting updated, and firmware appears to be worsening. It appears to be a problem that keeps getting worse. I was in need of a new router due to upgrade of my internet services. I'm in the UK, and my ISP is Virgin Media. The service uses DOCSIS 3.0 technology, via which I get 152 megabits. Not bad. And he says when he runs it on the test, he has around 159 down and 12 megabits up. And about a 10...
nice internet.
Yeah, with a 10 millisecond ping as well. He says, I was intending to continue the use of supplied Virgin Media Hub in my modem only mode and run a separate router. The service upgrade would give me a problem as the Netgear router I was using was only fast Ethernet and such would limit my service. I decided to try
so it only had
PFSense.
100 megabits ports, so having a 160 megabit internet connection and then a 100 megabit router wasn't going to work so well.
So he got a PC for £100. It has a 2.5-inch hard drive, 160 gigabytes in storage, 4 gigabytes of RAM. All in, total cost was £160. Not bad. Total power consumption is 16 watts. After some trial and error and getting all the settings across from his existing Netgear, the router's been in operation for about a year now. With dual-core Atom CPUs at 1.8 gigahertz, the router has plenty of performance to act as a router. It can be used to run a DNS server. He has Snort turned on, a proxy server, full VPN, and all of these functions can be set up via the PFSense web interface. He says it's really critical that I mention the dual NICs are Broadcom and not Intel. Also, the Atom processor does not support AES NI to accelerate the VPN encryption. Now, Alan, why do you suppose he figures it's important to mention the Broadcom and not Intel? Is that something unique to PFSense?
The Intels are definitely better, but the Broadcoms do work when they're wired NICs.
But he says overall, he's been very pleased with how PFSense has been running on his Min-X PC, and he says it's been a great experience of BSD. He says he hope you found it interesting.
We had a similar story. We host a video streaming thing for a government agency here that does math tutoring for all students from like grades 7 to 10 in every public school in Ontario. And they had a Cisco ASA firewall thing, had gigabit interfaces, but it couldn't do more than 200 megabits per second of traffic or it'd just fall over and die.
Yeah.
So we took one of their HP servers, which has 4 Broadcom gigabit Ethernet NICs. We took one of their dev server that was spare, reformatted it, threw PFSense on it, and now it can route 2 gigabits per second of traffic and doesn't even break a sweat.
Funny.
It's like we replaced this like $10,000 Cisco thing with the leftover server and it works better.
That's amazing when that happens. I love that. Jason writes in, and this is great. We had a question last week around like a Gluster FS alternative, and we're like, all right, we'll toss this out to the community. Maybe we'll get a good answer. Well, Jason writes in with not just one good answer, but like 3 and maybe even 4 really solid, great answers. He says, recently a viewer had a question with essentially sounded like a distributed network file system. Alan mentioned Gluster FS. Well, maybe I misunderstood the user's requirements, but there are a couple of distributed network file systems that are all open source. And basically the guy's question was, I know about Gluster FS. I don't really want to use Gluster FS right now. What are my other options? And so Jason says, check out Moose FS, Lizard FS, and Ceph, CEPH, which was recently purchased by Red Hat. He says also Lizard FS, by the way, is binary compatible code rewrite of Moose FS. Go check these out. You might find some of this information useful. Again, that's Moose FS, Lizard FS, and Ceph, which is CEPH. And
so of course, if a whole project, Lizard FS, was based on the fact of Moose FS is so terrible we need to rewrite all the code, that doesn't inspire me to use Moose FS very much. Now, Ceph I have heard of a bunch of people. I might actually try to look into that. Although that was also where SourceForge ran into all their problems, although I don't know that was actually because of Ceph. But yeah, I mentioned Gluster FS because he was asking about ZFS and so on, and I think that was the one that, as far as I had heard, was closest to working with FreeBSD.
Yeah. And
there's a working port of it.
Yeah, which we talked a little bit in last week's episode about. Now, Alan, maybe we should have put this at the top of the news segment because this is kind of a big deal. The integrity of FreeBSD could be completely compromised because some rogue hacker known as Alan Jude now has enhanced commit privileges. Can you expand upon this story, Mr. Jude?
Right. So, I'm sure everybody's seen the video if they were interested. Last year, in 2014, at BSDCan, they gave me a documentation commit bit, which allowed me to commit to the documentation tree at will. I'm under mentorship, so everything I do have to be reviewed first and so on. Anyway, but I could go crazy on docs. But based on my recent work on the installer and some other bits, they've now given me a commit bit for the source tree so I can actually break the entire operating system.
Good job, sir. I would say that is a level up, achievement unlocked, as it were.
Yes.
Nice.
And you should definitely feel sorry for Baptiste Rosson and Marcel Moulinar, who are my mentors and have to review everything I propose to commit.
I do. But you know what? It's a pretty
novice C.
It's pretty neat though. It's still at the same time. It's pretty cool. And you know what? I'm sure, Alan. I'm sure you'll be judicious and cautious with your commits. Yes. I'm sure. I have no doubt.
I haven't broken so far. I made XArgs, the utility which basically allows you to take an input thing and break it up into, if you have to delete 1,000 file names, instead of running rm file, you can do pipe that list into XArgs and it'll break it up into 2 or 3 commands, whatever, based on, you can only have so many files listed per command. And sometimes you're only allowed, for example, if you're doing ZFS, you're only allowed one argument at a time. So XArgs has this option where you can do like capital P5 and it'll do 5 of them at a time concurrently.
Yeah.
Well, on Linux, there's -P0, which does as many as possible at once. And BSD didn't support that. And so somebody had proposed a patch to add it, and I cleaned it up and got it committed.
Very nice. Cool. Well, you know what? If you would like Alan's same attention to detail and judiciousness and cautiousness, you can email the program, TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com. Go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com/contact and send in your questions. We want to get your questions to the show. Give us a whole new batch, please. I really do want them. Your security questions, your networking, your hardware, your infrastructure, questions about purchases, anything like that we like to just get into, please send them in to the show, and that way we can answer them in next week's episode of the TechSNAP program. You can also submit them to the subreddit, techsnap.reddit.com, and of course, we love to get them every single week, so keep sending them in. Even if we didn't get to your question this week, it might still be in our archive, and we'll try to get to it next week. And if you don't hear an answer, try the subreddit, because we have a really, really smart community as well. But with the feedback all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the roundup of stories that just didn't fit at the top of the show, but we still want to go over them, maybe give you some links to follow up on your own after the show. And a lot of these links came from our incredibly powerful and yet amazingly simple subreddit over at techsnap.reddit.com. And our first story this week is about Kim.com and him saying that your data ain't safe on Mega.com anymore. Now, I don't really give a crap about this story too much, but I find this whole controversy to be fascinating. I never trusted Mega to begin with, but in a QA session with Slashdot users this week, Kim.com, the infamous former millionaire at the center of the U.S. court case against Mega Upload, said that he wasn't so happy with the direction of Mega. He said he doesn't trust it anymore. And he says he's seen some criticism from open source advocates and hackers that Mega can't be trusted because of the source and it's not available. What assurances could you give us at this point? And he hummed and he hawed about it and he said, I'll give you more information later. He followed up with a tweet saying, I will issue a detailed statement about the status of hashtag Mega next week. Then you can make an educated decision if you still want to use it. Do you care, Alan?
Mm-hmm. Not especially. I never used the service.
No.
And exactly like you say, I wouldn't use something that wasn't open source because I wouldn't trust it.
Yeah. It seems like almost a non-story to me. But
basically, it's interesting to see the story that apparently he's not involved in Mega anymore and that the company we've suffered from a hostile takeover by a Chinese investor who has since had his shares seized by the New Zealand government.
That's the interesting part of the story, in my opinion.
I think those sentences might have been merged together. I think Kim.com had his shares seized, wasn't it?
I would imagine that's
not the Chinese guy, or maybe both. Who knows? Yeah, because part of it was the lawsuit actually against the website, right? I don't know.
You gotta love this next one, Alan. It comes from the register git root on OS 10.10. All it takes is a tweet. At least the exploit fits in a tweet. That's a nice one.
So it's really simple. Basically, if you echo a line. That includes like the who am I command and then all equals all, no password, all. Basically, the line that you would put in sudoers to give yourself root. So you echo that into FD number 3, pipe that, and then set an environment variable, dynamic loader, print to file, and specify the sudoers file, and run the new group command. It's actually, because that command's SUID, it's going to actually echo the line you just printed to that third file descriptor into that sudoers file. And then you just run sudo -s and you're root. Why an environment variable has the ability to write a random line from a file descriptor into a file, I would never understand.
Oh, so that way it just works, Alan.
Yeah.
It just works.
Yeah. So basically, set UID binary, like new group, and boom, you have
Yep.
everything you need.
Hey, Alan, did you ever read The Martian?
Nope.
Oh my goodness, son. If you need an Audible for a trip or something like that, get The Martian. It's the best book you'll read.
Oh, is that the one? There's the movie coming out.
Yes.
Yes,
with not Ben Affleck, but what's the other one? Not Ben Affleck. What's the other guy? Come on, what's the other guy?
Matt Damon.
Yeah, Matt Damon. Yeah, the other guy. Yeah, Matt Damon.
Heather was raving about it.
Oh, I bet she would, because a lot of the science they talk about at her company is talked about years ago. She's talked about in SciByte a year or two ago. And that was what was truly fascinating about The Martian for me as the co-host of SciByte, was it was like some of this
based on reality and so on. The movie less so probably.
It's Alan, literally, it's stuff that Heather told me about a year and a half ago coming to life in a book, and it's incredible, and you should listen to it. And the Audible book is mind-bendingly good. If we still have affiliate links at the bottom of our website, go use those first before you go get this book. Hook us up, because it's super good. And here's kind of the bummer part: is the author of The Martian got kind of his identity compromised, because basically the Comcast reps were socially engineered. So Andy Weir. And Mark, he's the guy that created Mark Watney, the main character in the book. He's the author of The Martian. He ran into a tricky problem back here on Earth this week, as ours puts it, when his Twitter accounts were hacked. Now, he says the culprit was a hacker who actually reset the password
for his
Comcast.net email. Right. Yeah. And then once, Alan, like you say all the time.
Like you said, once you get the email address, you have everything.
Exactly, which is exactly what happened.
Honestly, this is why I recommend against using ISP email addresses, partly because just someday you're probably going to, most people that have Comcast would rather they didn't. So if an alternative becomes available someday, you're going to switch. And then it's like, oh, but I need my Comcast email address because all of my accounts are tagged to it.
Yeah, and here's what he posted on Facebook as a follow-up. He said, they also set up an email forward to an account they control. So even after I changed my email password, they were still getting my emails until I found that. Whee!
And, yeah. This is why maybe your best bet is DigitalOcean droplet for a mail server. Only costs $5 a month. Go buy a domain, whatever, yourowname.com, and have an email address that you control forever on a mail server that nobody's going to mess around with.
Yeah.
It's a bit more work, but, $5 a month is worth it to make sure that nobody can socially engineer and replace your email account.
Yeah. You are a pro, Alan, at spotting when Netflix makes some really interesting posts about how they manage their infrastructure, and we have another one just like that in the Roundup. This one's a video from what is this?
Scale conference.
Okay. Scaling the
scaling
the Netflix global CDN, lessons learned from terabit zero.
Yeah, so they actually now sending a terabit per second.
God.
Which is 1,000 gigabits per second. And they basically described how they built up their network from zero capacity to being able to push a terabit per second.
Woo-wee, that's got to be a heck of a presentation. So, it looks like, wow, look at that. They're showing all kinds of goods, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. I've actually got to touch one of those Netflix storage appliances. Actually, an older one. But they actually brought it to Meet BSD in 2012. But those machines are awesome looking.
That's really slick, Alan. So cool video.
They kind of remind me a bit of like the Backblaze, where you just like fill the chassis with hard drives as tight as you can. Yeah. They just got them like bolted to every loose surface.
All right, let's move right along in the Roundup here. Right along, Alan. And that brings us to Thunderstrike 2. Now, this, you might remember Thunderstrike, the malware that could be spread by Thunderbolt devices that would write to the firmware on the boot ROM on a MacBook, because Thunderbolt is right on the PCI Express bus, and it made it essentially possible to do sneakernet spreading of malware. Well, Thunderstrike 2 came along, and this one used a software exploit that could be delivered over the internet, and that caused quite a bit of ruckus. Well, before we got a chance to tell you about it, Apple did release somewhat of a patch, at least for 10.10.4. If you're running 10.10.4, it's slightly patched. It's slightly patched. Yeah, thanks to a firmware update. The author says of the original malware that it's no longer trivially available. Yeah, or I'm sorry, vulnerable. But he lists several vulnerabilities that Apple still needs to fix. The company has been informed of the problems, and Hudson and Xenon Kovacs, the other researchers who developed Thunderstrike 2, will be presenting more details at Black Hat.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which one's first? I can never remember. It's Black Hat or DEF CON.
Well, Black Hat's going on right now. It started yesterday.
Right, and then it's DEF CON is the less corporate one that happens over the weekend after. Right?
Yeah. And so here, for those of you who are not fully up to date, Thunderstrike 2 is a new proof of concept attack that still spreads primarily through infected Thunderbolt accessories. But where the original Thunderstrike required a malicious user to have physical access to a Mac, you have to be able to hook a Thunderbolt peripheral up to it. This new one could be done via a phishing email or malicious website once the download was done, and if you ran it with administrative privileges. And so on most Macs, by default, they only run signed applications. You have to right-click open to bypass that. And in fact, in some corporate Macs, they only run software from the Mac App Store. So those Macs, that would be your first level of protection. Saying you had a way to bypass that. So if you bypass the default or even the more restricted mode, if you could bypass that, then the user will be prompted to enter their administrative level privileges. Now, they'd have to have administrative level rights on the Mac. And if they entered their own password and they had administrative level rights, at that point, this program would write itself to the ROM. It would not matter from that point forward, if you format the hard drive, if you put a new hard drive in, whatever. Every time it would reinfect the Macintosh, every Thunderbolt device you would connect would be infected with Thunderbolt Strike 2. So it's kind of a nasty thing. And that's why it's kind of a big deal that Apple is trying to patch this. And that's the danger of firmware level malware, is that most virus scanners and other anti-malware products won't be able to find it because they focus on RAM, they focus on disk. They can't scan these proprietary firmware controllers. So it's interesting, and it's something right now that could theoretically apply to any Thunderbolt-based hardware, but it's been only really tested on the Macs. It's kind of fascinating, Alan. Of course, you're probably patching your Macs right now, right, Alan? You're patching your Macs, Alan?
I don't have any Macs.
Oh, all right. Well, hey, let's go to our next Netflix story from Scale. Or maybe not from Scale, actually.
No,
but
this is a different conference.
Yeah,
this is from the nginx.conf conference.
Using Nginx and FreeBSD to build their own
so this is in this one they go into a lot more technical detail about specifically why they picked Nginx and FreeBSD, why they choose to contribute back to the open source projects, why they run like the developmental versions of the programs instead of not.
Oh, fascinating!
Like we could have picked a stable version of FreeBSD 8 or something and built on that, and then on the 1st of August, when FreeBSD 8.4 went end of life, we would have been kind of screwed and would have to try to like forklift all the way up to 10, and there'd be a bunch of big changes all at once.
They call
Whereas if we run ahead, we can.
They call it the myths of stable versions, and I just want to tell people about this because this is particularly fascinating. It comes in at 19 minutes in the video. If you want to hear what Alan's talking about, 19 minutes in the video where they talk about the myths of the stable version. And I'm checking this out after the show. All right, sorry to interrupt, Alan, but I just want to give the folks this specific moment.
But yeah, there's a bunch of them where he talks about the myths and the pros and cons of doing it the way they do it and why they chose to do it that way. This was a common theme at BSD Can this year with the companies that were there, because a bunch of them are in the middle of or just finishing giant projects where they're like moving from FreeBSD 6 to 10 or something like that, and they're like, yeah, we promise we'll never get this far behind again because that was really dumb. If you're building a new product, don't start with what's stable right now, because if it takes you 2 years to build your product, then you're gonna be past the end of life by the time you're done. Whereas if you start developing on your current one and can keep subsuming those updates as they're coming, then when you release your product, you're already on the latest version, and it's much easier to stay there. There's not every change that's happened since you started working, right? It's easier to spread that cost out week over week or month over month instead of, having to do these giant forklift projects all at once.
I agree. I'm just going to leave it at that. I completely agree. All right, Alan, this next one's kind of speaking of keeping up on top of things. Yes. I don't know. I'm so skeptical, but I just want to believe. I believe this can happen, Alan, and Google's going to make it. They're going to make it happen. This announced today. From this week on, Nexus devices will receive regular over-the-air updates each month focused on security, in addition to the usual platform updates. The first security updates of this kind will roll it out today, August 5th, that's yesterday, to the Nexus 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, and 10, and of course, even the Nexus player. The security update contains fixes for issue bulletins provided to partners through July 2015, including fixes for the lib stage fright issue. At the same time, the fixes will be released to the public via the open source project. Nexus devices will continue to receive major updates for at least 2 years, and security patches for longer of 3 years from initial availability, or 18 months from the last sale of the device via the Google Store.
So which is ever longer? So you get at least 3 years or 18 months after they stop selling it, whichever is longer. So if they keep selling it for 5 years, you get 5 years plus 18 months. Which, so this is what we asked for like 2 years ago. Google guaranteeing that we're going to push a security, we're going to have a patch Tuesday every month, and we're actually going to fix the problems. And, all it's going to take for this to happen everywhere is once Google makes this policy, and if the phone companies get used to doing it and it's going to have one every month, then they're just going to set up the infrastructure to just handle it.
Well, the OEMs also, Samsung, HTC, LG, Motorola, yep. They all have to get on board too. Like, that's just scratching the surface.
Samsung has already said they're on board.
Yes. Yep. Well, so they've said things like this before. That's why I'm a little skeptical. I hope it works. I really do. All right, Alan, this next one's a tweet.
It's really needed to happen.
So. It really needs to happen, yeah. All right, next one in the roundup. A call to PHP's MT_RAN generates only odd numbers, and they have a link here. This is a tweet in the roundup.
It shows the output. What's more interesting, if you look a little bit further down, somebody else has a second tweet where they talk about it looks even more interesting in hex. And if you look at that one, when you see the random numbers printed out in hex instead of as random numbers, they actually look quite a bit different, and you get... If you look at the hex, you see it's a bunch of random digits and then 0000001.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's like all the low bits are not being set or something. Looks like it could be a fairly serious bug. And yes, your random numbers are a lot less random if there's a whole string of zeros in them.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Oh, great. More retailers hit by a third-party breach, including the online services like some of the online Walmart and submissions, CVS Pharmacy, Rite Aid, Sam's Club, Walmart Canada.
Yeah. So basically all of these companies, what they have in common is they outsource to another company for video processing.
And photo processing,
if you've been to any of these, photo processing. If you've been to any of these stores, there's a kiosk you walk up to and you can plug a USB stick or stick an SD card in and get your photos done.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Well, the company that makes that kiosk or software for it anyway got breached. And so it has all the payment data and some of the stores say they're not sure that the credit cards were stolen, but there was a breach and it affected all of these companies because it turns out every one of these photos kiosks is from the same company. Oh
boy, yeah, that makes sense. You get the one guy, yeah.
Yeah, and like the way it's set up, instead of Walmart integrating in their website, there was like WalmartPhotos.com or whatever that was basically just pointing to this other company, and all of those sites are currently offline while they try to solve some of the problems they had.
Okay, Alan, our next roundup comes from OpenWall.com. What's this one about?
This is from the open source operating system security list.
Yeah.
So this is where they talk about security vulnerabilities and where you get CVE numbers assigned and how there's a separate private list where the Linux distros and FreeBSD and so on get told about vulnerabilities ahead of time to coordinate. All right, everybody, at noon on Friday, we're going to all release our patches for this vulnerability, right? To give everybody time to get all their patches ready. So Qualls, which is the company that does like SSLLab.com and a bunch of other stuff, they found 2 exploits for WordPress. And so they got their CVE numbers assigned, and they set up a coordinated release date for the patch for July 23rd.
Okay.
At 5 p.m. Not Eastern or Pacific, UTC. So then they posted on the list here. It's like, hello, it's July 23rd at 5 p.m. UTC, the coordinated release date for CVE 3245 and 3246. Please find our advisory below and our exploits attached. And then somebody replied with emphasis, why are you releasing a full exploit just minutes after the patch is released?
Right.
Disclosure, I am an employee of Red Hat, but this is purely a personal question.
Right. Like, why the hell are you doing this?
And then obviously the response is, because that's how coordinated release dates work. Instead of trying to shame quals for not following your arbitrary views on what is or isn't responsible disclosure, you should make sure Red Hat releases patches hours before the CRD, just like Ubuntu does. Right? So everybody was given the patch ahead of time and was like, make sure you're ready because we're releasing the details at this time. And then they're like, why did you release the exploit along with the details? It's like, because that's what you do. It's like,
maybe we need to visit that.
That's what this is basically the hybrid of full disclosure, which is you announce the vulnerability and give out the exploit code immediately.
Right.
And then there's responsible disclosures. You tell people ahead of time, everybody gets all patched up, and you say, I'm releasing at this time.
Yeah.
And I guess this guy was expecting them to release the details of the problem, but not the exploit code. And it's like, well, at that point, you're really not helping anything because anybody can read the details and write their own exploit code. But at least now that you've attached some exploit code, after I patched, I can use that exploit code to make sure that my patches were successful. So actually having the reproducer or the proof of concept with the security notice is quite helpful because it lets you make sure that their patches are actually been affected.
Well, that is something to think about, Alan.
Yeah.
All right, are you ready for this next story? Okay, so do we got to ruin all the things? HP has a new study that reveals that smartwatches are vulnerable to attacks. Smartwatches have only just started to become part of our lives, they say, but they deliver a new level of functionality that could potentially be opening the door to new threats and sensitive information and activities. The general manager of HP Security said, "Dun dun dun." I don't know, Alan. I mean, I guess anything that has a network operating system that has an active, persistent connection to the internet, or at least a network, has potentials to be exploited. But isn't this if you have a laptop, a Chromebook, a cell phone, a tablet, that's all the same, right? Don't you think?
Well, so why do we have to make the new mistakes every time we add a new class of device?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for you there.
Right? It's like, why can't the phone learn from all the mistakes we've made on cell phones instead of doing the same thing all over again?
Well, I would argue some operating systems have.
Right, but we should definitely learn from what Google just did what they finally just did for phones. Every device should have a monthly update cycle.
Right. Well, I would argue that we have learned that the Google model doesn't work and the Apple model does work. 85% of iPhones run the latest version of iOS. 85%. You know how many Android devices run Lollipop? 2%. So, I mean, I think it's pretty clear one model works and one model doesn't when it comes to updates and security patches.
But at the same time, Apple doesn't guarantee a lifetime like Android did. And basically, if you have an older iOS device, you're expected to throw it away, not keep using it.
Well, yeah, technically, except for you can have an iPhone 4 or 4S, which at this point is, let's see, so you have 4, 4S, 5, 5S, and 6. That's 5 years old. That's more than any Android device on the marketplace that gets updates today. So in practicality, in how it actually works for consumers.
An iPhone 4 gets the latest iOS?
I don't know, but even if it's the 4S, let's just say it's the 4S, that's still 4 or 5 years of updates.
Right.
That's still remarkable compared to Android.
Part of the problem when we're measuring the Android market share is that a lot of those devices are that old.
Yeah, but I would say my experience would be with Android, you get like 2, maybe 3 updates ever, and you're good.
Yes. Well,
you get 2 years of updates at best.
Well, the new change is that you definitely get more
right.
updates.
That would be the ideal thing is if they can set the pace and release those patches to ASOP, right? And then they get Samsung and HTC and LG and Motorola and Sony and all those other.
The problem is even if those guys get it, the problem is does Sprint, right? Because Sprint takes the Samsung image and stamps Sprint on it,
right?
And adds the Sprint store or whatever,
right? It's not just the OEM; it's also the carriers. Yeah.
So with that many layers in it, it's like, if Google can force the policy to happen, that'll be a good thing.
Here's how you just know that Google screwed the pooch on this and I always rail on this, but here's the thing: like Microsoft was able to come to the market and do this better. Microsoft did this better. And Google came to the market and they just...
Well, it's because unlike the other ones, Google didn't want to make the phones themselves.
Right. Well, and Microsoft, but this was before Microsoft they didn't own Nokia at the time. They just had a contract that said, have these minimum requirements.
The operating system completely.
Yes, exactly. They said you mandatory have to meet these requirements for patches and updates. And then, of course, Apple took it a step further, and they said, we refuse to let you have any control over it. And they said no to Verizon. They said no to Sprint. They said no to AT&T. And they went to some podunk network called Singular that nobody had ever even heard of, that was barely struggling in the market, which has become AT&T, which is like the number two carrier in the U.S. And in that entire time, they said, no, we will deliver the updates directly. Google didn't have that same stance. And that is the mistake they're repeating. The same mistake they're making with the watches, by the way. I have an LG Watch R, which doesn't get the same updates that all the other Android Wear updates watches get. I don't get Wi-Fi functionality, and I'm missing a security update on my LG Watch R that all the other Android watches have gotten updates for. The same fragmentation is happening again in the watch arena, and they're doing nothing about it.
Right, but at the same time, would Android be where it was if it wasn't for that fragmentation to allow people to have the different things, right? If Google controlled everything and didn't let Samsung go and make a better UI or some of the different features they've done,
I know.
It wouldn't be where it was.
That's true.
Either.
That's the catch-22 about the whole thing.
That's the kind of obviously the problem with anything even half open source is you get the fragmentation. Right? Because everybody thinks they can do it differently, or everybody wants their version of it, or whatever.
Well, and you do get things like Knox, which is an interesting development, and you get advancements in fingerprint readers and VR and cameras that so far.
But I guess the bigger thing is that the carriers need to not be allowed to fuck with it.
Yeah, really, right?
They're the ones that are really the impediment.
Right. But unfortunately, that's not the trend. I mean, the trend is the carriers are getting to be more entrenched, and that's why. Not to bring in Ting to this, but that's one of the reasons why I'm a Ting customer, is because I feel like
when I own the phone, there's no Ting firmware on my phone.
Right. Exactly. All right, Mr. Jude. Our next story in the roundup comes from Network World. The Belgian government phishing test goes off track and into the woods.
No. So they were doing this phishing test. We've talked about these before, where you purposely send a phishing email to all your employees, and if they fall for it, you give them remedial training or whatever. But apparently, it kind of slightly leaked out of the government and hit 20,000 employees of the high-speed train operator in Belgium. That covers all of Europe. So they sent 20,000 employees of a business that's not really related to the government the phishing email as well.
Love it.
Causing lots of people to have interesting issues with this phishing.
I bet.
Hence the goes off track is a pun because it was a train company.
I get it. Nice. Very nicely done. Hey, if you want to submit to the Roundup or maybe another story, make it in the main news segment, techsnap.reddit.com. That's where you go. Also, community feedback, discussion threads. We'll have a thread for episode 226 in there. If you want to give specific feedback for this episode, something unique to just this episode, put it right there, episode 226. And don't forget, you can also join us live. In fact, next week, are we doing a double snap next week, Alan?
Yes, we have to, because I'm going to the FreeBSD Cambridge Developer Summit the week after.
Yeah, so that means it's going to be a effing marathon day. So join us at 11 a.m. Pacific. That's usually when we start. Go to jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar. You'll get all of the scheduling in your local time zone. The robots just do it for you on demand. Also, that means we really need your emails, because we really need your emails if we're going to do 2 shows. Oh, my God. Go over there, please. jupiterbroadcasting.com/contact. I'm begging you. We need double emails because, we got to do double the shows. We got plenty of big stories because Black Hat and DEF CON are going on, so we got a crap ton of news, but we really, really need your feedback. So please send it in. Go to jupiterbroadcasting.com/contact or techsnap.reddit.com. We're also going to need more Roundup stories, so please double in on the efforts. Anything you see that's interesting, please go vote. I'm asking you because we want to have great episodes for you guys when we double record. And the best way to make that possible is to have you contribute in those ways. Contact and the subreddit. And that makes a huge difference. And also, last but not least, subscribe, so that way you just get the show automatically. You don't have to worry about when we record or anything like that. Just go to Jupiter Broadcasting, look for episode 226. You'll go in there. You'll see the download links right below that, RSS feeds below that. Show notes have everything we talked about in this week's episode of the TechSNAP program, documented in copious fashion, as Mr. Jude often does, which is very, very nice. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for tuning in this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you right back here next week.